Good evening. We are continuing our reading of The Light Princess by George MacDonald, one of my favorite fairy tales. We left off with chapter 2 in this wonderful sentence that now needs some explanation. The sentence was, "The mischief was done." You know that the little princess, the little baby had just been born, and it was at the christening that another princess, the sister of the king, who also happened to be a witch, who also happened to not be invited to the christening, showed up and did this mischief. In chapter 3, we find out a little bit more about what exactly she had done. Chapter 3 is entitled, "She Can't Be Ours." Her atrocious aunt had deprived the child of all her gravity. If you ask me how this was effected, I answer in the easiest way in the world. She had only to destroy gravitation. For the princess was a philosopher and knew all the ins and outs of the laws of gravitation as well as the ins and outs of her own bootlace. And being a witch as well, she could abrogate those laws in a moment, or at least so clog their wheels and rust their bearings that they would not work. But we have more to do with what followed than with how it was done. The first awkwardness that resulted from this unhappy privation was that the moment the nurse began to float the baby up and down, she flew from her arms towards the ceiling. Happily, the resistance of the air brought her ascending career to a close within a foot of the ceiling. And there she remained, horizontal, as when she left the nurse's arms. There she remained, kicking and laughing amazingly. The nurse, in terror, flew to the bell and begged the footman who answered it to bring up the house steps directly. Trembling in every limb, she climbed upon the steps and had to stand upon the very top and reach up before she could catch the floating tail of the baby's long clothes. When the strange fact came to be known, there was a terrible commotion in the palace. The occasion of its discovery by the king was naturally a repetition of the nurse's experience. Astonished that he felt no weight when the child was laid in his arms, he began to wave her up and not down, for she slowly ascended to the ceiling just as before. And there she remained, floating in perfect comfort and satisfaction, as was testified by the peals of tiny laughter. The king stood staring up in speechless amazement, and trembled so that his beard shook like grass in the wind. At last, turning to the queen, who was just as horror-struck as himself, he said, gasping, staring, and stammering, "She can't be ours, queen." Now the queen was much cleverer than the king, and had begun already to suspect that this effective came by cause. "I am sure she is ours," answered she. "But we ought to have taken better care of her at the christening. People who were never invited ought not to have been present." "Oh, no," said the king, tapping his forehead with his finger. I have it all. I have found her out. Don't you see it, Queen? Princess Magnemoit has bewitched her." "It's just what I said," answered the queen. "Oh, I beg your pardon, my love. I didn't hear you. John, bring the steps. Bring the steps I get on my throne with." For, you see, he was a little king with a great throne, like many other kings. The throne steps were brought and set upon the dining table, and John got upon the table on top of them. But he could not reach the little princess, who lay like a baby laughter cloud in the air, exploding with laughter continuously. "Take the tongs, John," said his majesty, and getting up on the table, he handed them to him. John could reach the baby now, and the little princess was handed down by the tongs. This is the end of chapter 2. Chapter 4. Where is she? One fine summer day, a month after these her first adventures, during which time she had been very carefully watched, the princess was lying on the bed in the queen's own chamber, fast asleep. One of the windows was open, for it was noon, and the day was so sultry that the little girl was wrapped in nothing less ethereal than slumber itself. The queen came into the room, and not observing that the baby was on the bed, opened another window. A frolicsome fairy wind, which had been watching for a chance of mischief, rushed in at the one window, and taking its way over the bed where the child was lying, caught her up, and rolling and floating her along like a piece of flue or a dandelion seed, carried her with it through the opposite window and away. The queen went downstairs, quite ignorant of the loss she had herself occasioned. When the nurse returned, she supposed that her majesty had carried her off, and dreading a scolding, delayed making inquiry about her. But hearing nothing, she grew uneasy, and went at length to the queen's room, where she found her majesty. "Please, your majesty, shall I take the baby?" she said. "Where is she?" asked the queen. "Please forgive me. I know it was wrong." "What do you mean?" said the queen, looking grave. "Oh, don't frighten me, your majesty," exclaimed the nurse, clasping her hands. The queen saw that something was amiss, and fell down in a faint. The nurse rushed about the palace, screaming, "My baby, my baby!" Everyone ran into the queen's room, but the queen could give no orders. They soon found out, however, that the princess was missing, and in a moment the palace was like a beehive in a garden. And in 1 minute more, the queen was brought to herself by a great shout and a clapping of hands. They had found the princess, fast asleep under a rose bush, to which the elvish little wind puff had carried her, finishing its mischief by shaking a shower of red-rosed leaves all over the little white sleeper. Startled by the noise the servants made, she awoke, and, furious with glee, scattered the rose leaves in all directions like a shower spray in the sunset. She was watched much more carefully after this, no doubt, yet it would be endless to relate all the odd incidents resulting from this peculiarity of the young princess. But there never was a baby in a house, not to say a palace, that kept the household in such constant good humor, at least below stairs. If it was not easy for her nurses to hold her, at least she made neither their arms nor their hearts ache. And she was so nice to play ball with. There was positively no danger of letting her fall. They might throw her down or knock her down or push her down, but couldn't let her down. It is true they might let her fly into the fire or the coal hole or through the window, but none of these accidents had happened as yet. If you heard peals of laughter resounding from some unknown region, you might be sure enough of the cause. Going down into the kitchen or the room, you would find Jane and Thomas and Robert and Susan, all in some playing at ball with the little princess. She was the ball herself, and did not enjoy it the less for that. Away she went, flying from one to another, screeching with laughter, and the servants loved the ball itself better even than the game. But they had to take some care how they threw her, for if she received an upward direction, she would never come down again without being fetched. This is the end of chapter 4.